Hello, hey, it's Nick Dove here, and this is the Afterlife Pod. Thank you for joining me. I hope you are comfortable. I hope you're in a good place mentally. I hope you're nice and relaxed and ready to hear another wonderful near-death experience. This one is from nderf.org. So I usually use one of two websites to read these. These are from nderf, nderf.org. So if you want to check it out yourself, be my guest. This one is from, I'm thinking, a guy called Chris T for Tom. So here we go. This is a three-part experience involving an STE and two NDEs. Two of the three experiences were remitted many years ago under my pre-married name and are recorded as STE 511 and 6510. The third experience has not been previously submitted. It has been 20 years since my first out-of-body experience. I have since decoded the purpose behind these interventions. This account includes the context of life in which the events occurred. It took these three successive lessons for me to finally choose to be my greater self. Life has been a steady rise into bliss ever since. When the spirit leaves the body. This experience, which lasted for months, occurred when my wife of 10 years admitted engaging in multiple affairs and stated she was now pregnant by another man. I had 3 young children and was not prepared for the life changes this entailed. She expressed distress as she did not know how to proceed, but her actions up to and after that point showed me that our relationship had ended. While we were talking about her being pregnant, I found my consciousness floating above my body, to the right and slightly above my shoulder. This experience of floating was not a sensation. There was no feeling of floating, only the fact that I was. I felt empathy and overwhelming compassion for the despair I saw in my physical self. But the pain evident within that body was not felt by this aspect of me. I was within the room, but I wasn't confined to my body. It was as though I was everywhere and anywhere within the room all at once. For a few moments, I orientated myself with this new freedom, moving about the room and observing the environment from various angles. I remember darting below the dresser to where no body would fit, knowing I would be able to see from that perspective and loving the effortlessness by which I moved. Out-of-body exploration was short-lived though, because my attention was needed. My conscious self started coaching my physical self on how to get through what was going on. I observed myself crying and instructed myself to stop my chin lower so the anguish would be more apparent. I could see that my physical self was suffering immensely, but my conscious self was experiencing no pain. In fact, I felt very empowered and elated as my consciousness filled the room and I could observe everything within it from all angles. I knew my task was to coach my physical self through this experience. I remember questioning the reason behind showing my emotional pain. I had the inclination that sharing those feelings would be hurtful to my wife. And besides, the aspect in control was elated and feeling quite wonderful outside of the suffering body. It was immediately within me that I needed to facilitate my wife's journey by bringing awareness to the effects of her choices. My responsibility was beyond question, an obligation, so I did not hide what my worldly self was feeling. My physical self was operating like a puppet. Everything I told that self to do, it did. When the conversation ended, I told my physical self it was time to leave and reflected on whether it could drive. I watched until I was certain it could manage the trip, compassionately observing it as it drove 20 minutes to town. My conscious self was rarely in the vehicle during the trip. Instead, it floated above, witnessing each turn and feeling comfortable that my physical self would make it to the city. I recall thinking the words, "You will be fine," as I floated above the vehicle. My thoughts still guided my physical self, but I was aware it could cease to function. I would best describe the body as a reflection of self and the spirit as the conscious self. It was as though the reflection could navigate pattern while unquestioningly accepting thought-based instruction. While in attendance, the spiritual conscious self was fully in charge. Floating above my vehicle was an empowering sensation. Moving was effortless. I simply thought to myself to be where I wished to be, and there I was. I felt no motion or touch sensations of any kind. As I followed the vehicle, I could see objects on both sides of the road as though I were in a low-flying plane. My van appeared to be about the size of a quarter, so you can imagine what my peripheral vision was like. The odd thing was I saw objects that I had never seen before, set way back from the sides of the roads. The view was complete and accurate to every minute detail, even though I never had been down those roads. After the experience, I drove down these side roads and examined a map, witnessing in awe what I'd been able to see from above. When I arrived in town, I went to my workplace. I don't remember much of what took place there, save one girl who provided counselling. It was not her role, but she did it for me as a friend, and it helped a lot. I recall while she spoke with me that I was flitting in and out of my physical self. I could feel the emotional distress within my body and could not bear to return to it completely at that time. I remember being out of body as both the most empowering and most devastating experience of my life. I remember the awe I felt in realizing that my physical self was only a husk through which I experienced life, that it wasn't really me. At the same time, I could feel neither the pain of the body or the joy. I would hug my children but not feel the love which I so desperately wanted to feel. This went on for months, where my conscious self was only marginally attached to my physical body. I recall reflecting on the irritation and frustration I felt because I could not become whole within my body again. I estimate that it was more than 9 months before I could experience a genuine emotion as a whole self. It was years before I fully returned to my body to experience life as one being. Until that time, I spent much of my worldly existence as a marginally attached spirit. I wanted to be clear. However, this spirit was fully me and fully whole in itself. It was difficult being outside of the body for an extended period. Initially, I felt bliss, awe, and amazement for the revelations one has while out of body. Great understanding came over me, for I knew that the self exists apart from the physical. However, I neither moved on to the afterlife nor back to the physical life. Instead, I found myself remaining in stasis as an observer, guiding a puppet. I did not see God or any spiritual beings, perhaps because I really wasn't seeking to. I felt as though I had a duty to see my physical body through this traumatic experience. At many times, the pain was too much for the body, and it would break down in a convulsive display of tears and agony. My spiritual self would feel compassion for that other self, comforting and caring for the emotional needs of the body, and providing understanding and reassurance when the body was not tormented. My spiritual self would busy itself on logic puzzles, and sometimes it would travel from room to room exploring the environment in more depth than was possible while working. That too was very liberating, and I learned a lot about my workplace that surprised me. My spiritual self attempted to rejoin the physical several times. The pain of this world was beyond what it could handle, and on more than one occasion the attempt at rejoining my body resulted in suicidal contemplation. I envisioned my death many times, picked the method and place, and then fear brought me bawling to a doctor who found me help. Note that the spiritual self isn't accustomed to experiencing the pain we go through in life. It tends to feel much more compassion and love. I cannot process the pain humans can experience or inflict upon others. The enlightened experience of the spirit is very apparent in that full account, but for a greater understanding we need more. For many years, I was blessed by memories of only my spiritual journey, but there were no memory of the earthly body. There were two distinct sets of experience. There was a physical self living here on earth, and a spiritual self of perfect freedom that lived elated but was unbound. This part is critical. It was just as if life for so many wherein the spirit and body are not one. It wasn't until many years later, after writing my 2009 account, that my spirit and body became fully unified and the memories of body were reinstated. It is only now, as a whole being, that I can detail the account of both aspects of self. The torment of earthly pain was too much for the body to endure. It would break into fits of agony. This means it had feelings, even if my spiritual self didn't experience them. There was honourable behaviour. It was ingrained or autonomous. I remember many times hearing of how my body's choices were aligned. Absent the spirit's guidance, the body simply operated from memory and unconscious action. On earth, it didn't appear different from regular life, for the body was the same and the action so starkly similar that evidence of spiritual departure was scarce. Agony of the body continued, and my spiritual self, which I would term my authentic self, remained as a loving guide. I was supported and encouraged when needed, and adventurous when not. It was very apparent that there were two experiences. At the time of divergence between spirit and body, alignment between the two was strong. The body was at the gates of hell. The spirit was blissful and in heaven, and both experiences were genuine. The choices of both were aligned. The tearing apart of earthly life took time, and so the pain of body endured. Spirit and body did not unify in that discord. Spirit used free will to remain separated. It is